Assalamu alaikum, my dear friends. It's very, very good to be with you. I hope you are doing well, your side. Just another short discussion or contribution I want to make to the debate around Hadith. And some of you might wonder why this focus on Hadith. You see, when we face a severe impasse, a situation of pain, of suffering, of hardship, of indescribable calamity, when we face such a situation, we have to do muhasabah. We have to do introspection. We have to analyze ourselves and look at what have we been doing wrong to have made us come to this point of calamity. Now, many of you, those who have a contrary position to what I've been arguing on this channel, have mostly had the position, but Anwar, so many scholars have come before you or before us, and they have not questioned the Hadith, they have accepted it, they have uncritically said that Bukhari, Muslim and all these books are, next to the Qur'an in reliability and in trustworthiness. So then you just fob it off. You make light of the debate, of the question, or the argument that I'm presenting, but it's clearly a fallacy. There is the fallacy called the appeal to authority. You are not using your mind. You are simply invoking another authority. And to make progress in this world, we cannot just say that important people say so, that's why it is so. My friends, that is a recipe for slavery. You cannot claim truth because of the power of those who utter or claim it. Because that would be the same as saying that might makes right, or the power of history, the power of the scholars. And Allah says very, very clearly in the Qur'an, the Jews, the mistake they committed was they adopted their wise men, their scholars, their sages as gods in addition to Allah. And if you like Hadith, I'll add you the tafsir of this verse, which comes from the Hadith. And then the tafsir of this is the companions of the Prophet asked the Prophet, listen, the Jews are not worshipping their rabbis. Why is this verse making that statement? Prophet answers them, Jews never worshipped them. But what the Jews did do was, when their scholars told them halal is haram, they accepted it. And when their scholars and their rabbis told them what is unlawful is lawful, they also accepted it. Which means they turned their rabbis into gods. So coming back to the question then of Hadith, I've got a question that was asked to Sheikh Al Asi. So I want to play for you the answer that Al Asi gives to the question of why do we accept Hadith? And I want to comment on his answer, and hopefully we can learn from it. Let me just play it for you, and you can have a look at it.
The question that was just posed is concerning the Hadith. So are we required to accept all of the Hadiths and consider such books as Sahih al-Bukhari to be maybe on par with the Qur'an, meaning that we accept all the Hadiths that are in it? Or should the ulama do their due diligence and try to figure out what are those hadiths that we should be going by, and if there are any hadiths that have to be disregarded? More or less, I think that was the question. This is a very important issue. And if we collected all of the hadiths we have in all of the books of hadith, traversing all of the schools of thought, we have hadiths in the hundreds of thousands. Those are quite a number of hadiths. If we wanted just to make a simple mathematical formula and say that the Prophet expressed himself throughout 23 years, and out of those 23 years, obviously he had to sleep, and he had to rest, and he had to exclude himself, we'd come out with a certain amount of hours. If we were to divide the hadiths by those certain amount of hours, we'd find out that the Prophet was speaking all day in all of the time that he had. And obviously that's not the case. So quantity-wise, it's impossible for the Prophet to have expressed all of these hundreds of thousands of hadiths. But then when we take a look at the meaning.
Okay, I just wanted to summarize what he's said so far, and that is, to the question whether we should accept hadith as an article of faith, as on par with the Qur'an, because that is really what the Salafist is arguing, is that hadith is a second form of divine revelation. That is genuinely what we are arguing against, is the Salafist position that hadith books constitute a form of divine revelation. So they are deifying hadith. And what he is saying here is just one technical aspect of hadith, is that if you enumerate, if you count up, if you add up all the hadiths that are in existence, it would be impossible for the Prophet to have spoken all those words. He would have no time for anything else. So that's just a practical problem with hadith, right? But then he comes to the answer now, and that is really what I'd like you to pay attention to.
Meanings of some hadiths, they obviously cannot blend in with the meanings of the ayat in the Qur'an. So we begin to realize we have some hadiths that are not really hadiths, but they are there in the hadith literature. You'll find them in the books of hadith. And the classification of hadiths, we have some hadiths that are sahih, some hadiths that are hasan, other hadiths that are da'if, and still other hadiths that are manhood.
You see, now here I want to actually raise the first criticism, and that is that, you see, for a judge, for any person that has to formulate a judgment based on evidence, it simply does not count. Evidence that is related from one person to the next is simply not evidence. Now, what the whole idea of the sanad is as follows. Somebody, Imam Bukhari, travels to Basra or Baghdad, and he discovers somebody has in his possession a hadith. He himself did not speak to the people in that hadith's chain. And that is the mistake that Sheikh Al Asi is making here. He is saying if there's agreement in the chain, these 5 or 6 people are not together. They are not sitting in a room. We are not getting corroboration from them. What we are getting is just the final person in that chain of narration is vouching for the authenticity of the previous 4 or 5 people in that chain. For all we know, the final person in that chain could have fabricated the entire chain. And we know there are chains that are fabricated. There are certain chains that go via Abu Huraira because they are so common. It was so easy to resort to that chain or to invoke that chain that it was abused. And so what he is saying now is that the chain of narration, we could somehow give credence to those chains of narration. And that is a massive problem here, my friends.
Which means these compilers of hadiths, they had to rely on transmitters of hadith. The collection of hadith began over 100 years after the Prophet passed away. So Al-Bukhari or Muslim or Al-Nasa'i or Ibn Majah or At-Tirmidhi or Abu Dawood, they had to go to individuals who they trusted and ask them what types of hadiths that they themselves have memorized from the previous 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 individuals that separated them from the Prophet. So now we had a chain of individuals who said that the Prophet said a certain hadith. And most of the times, the hadith is ranked reliable or not, depending on this chain of individuals. So if everyone agreed that 4 or 5 people heard the Prophet say a certain thing, a certain hadith, and those 4 or 5 individuals are known to be truthful and trustworthy.
Now, I think that is. I hope it's not being dishonest, but it is just plain wrong. 4 or 5 individuals are not attesting, because that would be very sound and acceptable testimony. 5 people come and they personally heard the Prophet say something that is reliable evidence, and we should act based on reliable evidence. That would be, multiple testimonials from the Prophet. But clearly what he is misrepresenting the way that hadith reaches the muhaddith, like Bukhari. He is not in the presence of those 5 individuals. He is in the presence of one of those 5, and that one person is vouching for the other. So I hope I hope he's only misunderstanding the issue here, and he's speaking based on a misunderstanding.
Worthy and reliable and honest, then they classified that certain hadith as being a valid or authentic or sahih hadith.
It's like when you connect a set of globes in series, which means where they are connected in a sequence, and one of these globes fails, then the entire series dies. All the globes die. And that is the same way that hadith works. To you that if you are bringing the hadith narrative in a sequence, in a series of narrators, you cannot find it. There is no law, no court of law that will find that to be valid evidence or valid knowledge, my dear friends. And I think we have to ask the Sheikh to adapt his understanding on this matter. But here comes the final problem I have with his response to this question. Take a listen to this part now.
As far as we know, the hadiths that do not conflict with any ayah in the Qur'an are acceptable hadiths. If there is a hadith that conflicts with the ayat of the Qur'an, then we are not to accept that type of hadith.
Any hadith that does not conflict with the Qur'an, we should accept. Now, what does it mean? Should we accept it as being divine? Because what the Salafist is arguing is that when a hadith is acceptable, you must accept it as the divine word of God. Now, if he means that, then we completely disagree with that position. Because you cannot make divine something that's the source of which is not divine. Only God is the source of what is divine and what is a divine ruling and a sacred and a religious ruling. So what he's saying is that hadiths that are not contradictory to the Qur'an would be acceptable. But you see, that allows 150,000 hadiths, as he himself states, to swamp the Qur'an in terms of the emphasis, because hadiths are not just about not reiterating or articulating the Qur'an. They invent new sacred areas. They invent areas that are sacred that are not listed in the Qur'an. So, for example, the hadith will invent a level of detail in terms of salah that the Qur'an is not at all interested in. So in other words, the hadith is turning something that is not mentioned, not elaborated on in the Quran, into a huge, elaborate aspect of the deen. And so if you go to madrasa, you spend almost half of the time learning about things that are not elaborated in the Quran. The same with dietary laws. So the hadith in that case again goes into an immense amount of detail about what type of food is halal, what type of food is haram, the clothing, the dress, the appearance, the wearing of a beard, the wearing of gold. They are so dogs, that we should have this hatred and aversion for dogs. These are not things that are in the Quran. I take complete issue with what the Sheikh, although I respect the Sheikh immensely, but I take complete issue with this. And here I come to the conclusion, because I started out by saying that the reason we have this debate is because it is related to the crisis in the world today. It is related to the massacre in Gaza. It is related to the inaction of the Arabs in the heartland of Islam. There's not one Arab in the peninsula that has, or one Arab country that has risen and has opted to go forth and to defend the Palestinians, which means all their scholars of hadiths, of hundreds of hadith schools, all their seminaries have not meant a damn thing for Muslims in Gaza. And the most pure and honest test for truth is to see the innocent dying and nobody moving a finger. It's like when you walk down the street and you see a group of 10 men standing and looking at a young girl being beaten up, then raped, then set alight and burnt. And those men just stand there and watching. You can form a judgment about the morality of those men. You can form a position as to the righteousness of those men. And that is exactly what we are seeing in the world today. We are seeing the collective Muslim mind has died. The collective Muslim spirit is dead. And what we are doing, people like me, we are going back and we are trying to find the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is that Islam, the important aspects of Islam have been de-emphasized, and unimportant aspects of Islam have become overemphasized, and so Muslims have lost their way. They've lost the ability to identify evil. They've lost the ability to identify their own priorities, and so they go for self-preservation. They go to save their own lives. And I'm making the exception here of the Ansarullah in Yemen, of the Hezbollah in Lebanon, and also of all the Jamaats in Iraq and in Syria that have bravely given their lives, that are dying to do something for the Palestinians. And also Iran to some extent, who is somehow also suffering the consequences through sanctions and whatever, and the murdering of their leaders. So I'm saying to you, as a Sunni, you see here as a couple of nations, they are not Sunni, but they are doing things better. Here are we, the Sunni masses, the majority. What does it even mean, that majority? 80% of them. You always like to throw around 1.8 billion Muslims. I don't want to even hear that number anymore, because that number is useless to me. That number is useless to me. If you are 1.6 or 1.5 billion Sunnis and you cannot help 2 million Gazans, then there's something wrong with your religion, my friend. There's something wrong with your faith. And we here, people like me, are advancing the position that Hadith has come and has cluttered our minds, have cluttered the way we understand our deen. Because our deen, there's ayats in the Qur'an that says, Infiru khifafan aw thiqalan. Go forth, whether equipped lightly or heavily. Wajahidu fi sabilillah. And wage war in the way of God with your goods and your persons. And I think we are so busy looking at hadith. Our madrasas are teaching so much hadith that we forgot to teach those verses. At some point in time, we forgot to teach people Qur'an. And we forgot to tell them how sacred is Qur'an, how important is Qur'an, how important is Shahada, how unimportant is this life. And here we have this whole hadith business that is all about this life, all about how you should behave, how you should, drive your camel, how you should grow your beard. It's all to do with this life. That is what hadith is doing. It is trapping you in some sort of fantasy world in this life, and this is the life that you want to live here for 100 years and earn Jannat. My friends, we have it completely wrong, and I want to ask people like Sheikh Al Asi to be more assertive and not to play around with this topic. This is an important topic, and we are not going to fix this ummah if we don't fix our position with hadith.